Hello and welcome to Ruben Uncut. Today's topic, Wonka. Now, I could be doing a review on The Beekeeper right now, which I enjoyed, and I have some things to say about the movie's politics and or lack thereof. But today, I'm talking about Wonka because I saw this on Friday and I have had thoughts. Plus, when I made a Facebook post saying Waika, as in, why does this exist? Some people were excited and wanted to hear what I had to say about it. Well, I've got some things to say about it. Now, first of all, I might be the voice of dissent here because almost everyone else I talked to said this movie surprised them and was delightful. I can't say the movie surprised me, and I cannot call it delightful. If anything, it's too delightful. But we'll get to that in a minute. Up front, let's be clear. The person who was excited to hear my thoughts, wanted me to do a comparison of the Wonka movies to the books. Now, I can't do that. Why? Because I have not read the original book. Weirdly enough, I have listened to the sequel book on cassette, but not the original. No real explanation for this, just a thing. I do know some of the differences between the movies and the books. And I also know some of the things that have been changed in the Wonka book over the years to be, not racist. But let us move along. So, a lot of people told me they liked this movie. And I previously, before seeing this movie, had almost no expectations. And then a bunch of people told me that they went in with no expectations, and it was surprisingly delightful, which unfortunately gave me expectations. And what I discovered was, look at how too much the image behind me is. Also, like, are these chocolates? The movie has a real big emphasis on chocolates, and I don't know if these are chocolates. So, where do I even start with this? So first, let's talk a little bit about Roald Dahl. So Roald Dahl was a guy who wrote a bunch of books for kids. Now, not everything about the guy was great. First of all, he came up in a time where you were very morally lucky if you were born not racist. And I don't think he was racist, but the Oompa Loompas were originally pygmies. Second of all, Roald Dahl has a history of anti-Semitism, which is why he was so mad that Gene Wilder was cast as Wonka, even though Gene Wilder is the entire reason that we love this franchise and series. It's a shame Roald Dahl couldn't see it that way because of his hate blinders, but them's is the facts. Gene Wilder was perfect. Maybe not perfect for Roald Dahl. Of course, Roald Dahl was also mad that the movie had songs in it. Something that the new movie took into zero account because it is fucking packed with singing. It opens with singing, it closes with singing, it's constant singing. And none of it's memorable. None of the music is memorable. I don't like it. The music in this movie feels like it's there because it has to be. Because the music is just part of what's moving it along. None of the music is memorable. There's a couple moments where he sings things that we might be familiar with, and that's the most memorable musical part. Unfortunately, the most memorable song in the movie, which I even don't really remember, is a song sung by people who I think the movie would genuinely be better if that scene did not exist. To be honest, I found Wonka tedious, boring even. An explosion of color and sound. An overload of whimsy. Because ultimately, that is the problem with Wonka, because Wonka has forgotten the thing that made previous adaptations of this character work. The thing that people forget about Roald Dahl's writing is that, yes, it was for children. And yes, there was a lot of magic realism and even what we could describe as whimsy. However, Roald Dahl was also very cynical. He practically wrote satire for children. Essentially, things that would satirize the behavior of parents, adults, and the worst kinds of children, which is kind of what made Roald Dahl unique, what made him interesting. What made him Roald Dahl was that edge plus the whimsy. It was like if Dr. Seuss stopped pretending to be nice and to rhyme. But this movie is 100% whimsy. In fact, that's the problem with Wonka. Is it's all sugar, no spice. They have taken Wonka. You see, this is important, okay? This is important. If you think about Charlie and the Chocolate Factory or Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, or whatever they're calling that movie nowadays with Gene Wilder, here's the facts about that movie, okay? The things that make it work are, A, we start off, even in the musical aspects of it, we start off more grounded, more cynical. It feels like there's a basic primer for the world. It feels like a satirical, heightened version of the real world. It's cynical. A lot of the characters are unlikable, and they're meant to be. In fact, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, or Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, or whatever the first one's called, I think it's Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, is practically Saw with candy, okay? It's about punishing behavior in children who are bad children because they have bad parents. It's the whole movie. That's Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, the book, the movie. In fact, it's both of the movies, except there's a key difference. Okay, so the first movie nails the cynicism, nails the satire, nails the idea of this sort of I'm punishing your bad behaviors type of story. Just absolutely nails it. And then you have the Tim Burton one. Now, it's honestly less cynical than the original, mainly because they actually show us that the kids get out of the factory alive. Something the original does not show us. We just have to believe Gene Wilder. He says, oh no, they'll be fine. They did. They probably did. And then you got the Tim Burton movie. The Tim Burton movie is the Tim Burton version. It's called Tim Burton-y. Tim Burton got in there and ejaculated his Tim Burton juice all up in there. And now it's the Tim Burton version. And fortunately, Tim Burton isn't quite what you'd call cynical, but his sort of I'm a goth kid type aesthetic sort of weaves in its own natural cynicism into the movie, which gives it that appropriate level of extra darkness that, you know, the story is calling for. Wonka has fucking none of that. There is no darkness in Wonka. There is no cynicism in Wonka. Wonka is a movie about dreams. It's a movie about Wonka. Okay, so first of all, Wonka prequels are a bad idea because that's where Willy Wonka comes from. Is not what makes Willy Wonka interesting, which is an important distinction, where Wonka comes from, is almost unnecessary. It's unnecessary information because where Wonka tells us he comes from in the original movie is more interesting than what studios attempted to show us afterwards. First, you have your Tim Burton movie where Wonka is this. Wonka, Tim Burton's version is a little bit more in line with the Roald Dahl universe because it focuses on terrible parents and their effects on their kids. But it still honestly did nothing for the movie. Like, who gives a shit that his dad was a dentist? That's not what makes this character interesting. It fails to understand that Charlie and the Chocolate Factory's main character is Charlie. The Wonka deal is a lot like Wolverine in the X-Men movies and comics. He's this character that's crazy popular and has risen to this level where he is omnipresent in these comics, but fails to understand that the thing that built his character was the mystique, the lack of information, the mystery, the I am what you see attitude. And that's kind of the same for Willy Wonka. Willy Wonka in previous movies stands out. Now, to be fair, like the Tim Burton lens is gonna Tim Burtonize it all. But generally speaking, especially in the original movie, there is the movie before we enter the chocolate factory and the movie after we enter the chocolate factory. The movie builds us into the insanity. The moment where we meet Gene Wilder's character, the actor specifically came up with the whole role thing so that the other actors would never be able to trust him. He deliberately sets up the mystique. This movie has no mystique. There is nothing subtle about this movie. This movie is just people throwing color in your face, all for like 2 hours. It is almost every frame of the movie is whimsified, is heightened, is part of this, ooh, isn't it whimsical? I haven't been this bored since Mary Poppins Returns, which is another movie that makes a lot of the same mistakes here, except this is a prequel, so it has prequelitis instead of sequelitis. And what's fascinating, though, is that Wonka doesn't make the classic prequel mistakes. No, it makes all its own prequel mistakes. In fact, in many ways, it goes too far the other direction as far as prequels, because so much of this movie is meaningless to the following stories. And we'll get back more into that. So, but let's just get into this movie, okay? It starts with a musical number. It's Willy on a boat arriving in some country, some town. Do they live in England? I don't know, because it's one of those movies where no one has the same goddamn accent. And I don't mean like, oh, that guy's got a Yorkshire accent, and that guy's got a Cockney accent, that guy's like maybe an Irish immigrant, and like, no. I mean, it's a movie where almost everyone's got British accents, except for Keegan-Michael Key, who, by the way, huge positive. Love Keegan-Michael Key. Always a pleasure to see him in anything. Get that out of the way. No real problems with him. If anything, he gets closest to a Roald Dahl character of many of the other characters. But that does not change the fact that he is a dude walking around with what appears to be a Brooklyn accent, while everyone else around him has a British accent. But that's not the only place it happens either. There's a couple other weird accents as well. But also, let's not forget that when we go to the flashback of Willy living with his mom, because this movie focuses on the mom instead of his terrible dad, it's good mom versus terrible dad stories. They're not really compatible, but hey, maybe they both could have happened. Maybe his mom at some point was like, you know what? Your dad's a dentist piece of shit. You're gonna live with me and eat chocolate and be happy. But we'll get into that. Why that's an interesting choice in and of itself. Let's focus here. My point here at this moment was, in fact, that his mom has like this clearly British Isles accent, and the kid who plays Wonka and Wonka don't. They don't have the same accent as their mom. They do not. They live on a boat together. He's illiterate. Everything he knows about the world from this woman. How does he not have her accent? It doesn't, it makes zero sense. It makes zero sense. The accents make zero sense, is what I'm saying. I'm sorry, I'm getting caught up on the accent thing. I gotta refocus. The movie starts with him arriving in England, and Wonka's walking around, and he has this daydream sequence where everyone's dancing and he's handing out chocolate. And the thing about this sequence is that this sequence implies that he is an unreliable narrator to the events of the movie. Like, some of the events may not in fact be happening, but this is the only point in the movie where it is clearly indicated that we are watching a fantasy and not the real thing. Meanwhile, other fantastical things will happen later in the film where they will be witnessed by other characters. But at the beginning of the movie, this thing is happening specifically so he can be fined for daydreaming, to imply how strict this society is, even though this society at no point feels grounded or real. The society that he's put into feels like a cartoon from the moment you say go. There is no building up of the unraveling of the reality. There is only whimsy. There is only cartoon. There is only this heightened reality. There is no build to the heightened reality. Every moment of increased whimsy barely registers above the level of Broadway musical whimsy that is layered into every frame of the fucking movie. And it's a bad choice, because the movie is, once again, I'll say it, it's gonna be the title: Wonka, all sugar, no spice. Wonka soon meets two of the villains of the story, because the movie has multiple villains. In fact, it probably has too many villains. But anyways, he ends up at this boarding house, which is actually a scam to get people to sign themselves into servitude, to do laundry, to pay off fines that people didn't know they incurred while they were staying at this boarding house. And the people who run the boarding house are these ridiculously cartoonish villains who are just ridiculously cartoonish. Like, they're too much. They feel less like Roald Dahl characters and more like characters. Like, if you described a Roald Dahl character to someone who had never seen Roald Dahl, and they're like, oh, okay, I get the idea. They're like that. They are like that. That's the type of characterization we're dealing with here for most of the characters. And I don't know if it's an actor problem. I don't know if it's a director problem. I don't know if it's a script problem. I don't know if it's a combination of all three. But the way it happened and the way it turned out is lame as fuck. And so he ends up in this boarding house where he meets this girl who they call Noodle, because she's got this ring that's an N that looks like it has an N on it. We'll come back to that. We'll definitely come back to that. But basically, she becomes the main friend to Wonka, like the go-to sidekick. Now, when he ends up working in this state of indentured servitude, which you would think would count as spice, you would think, but no, it doesn't. The major problem with this sequence is it introduces us to a lot of characters, because this movie has a lot of characters. And I'm going to tell you straight up, not good characters. Wonka's fine. Noodle is fine. A couple of the villains are okay. Like Keegan-Michael Keyes. Solid angle on that one. Although maybe they overplayed the I got morbidly obese from chocolate thing a little hard. Especially since he's eating only regular chocolate. So like that's this thing, is that like Wonka has to go so balls hard on everything he does just to make it stand out. But like he's in the whole movie. The exception of a couple of those scenes, they're just villain on villain talking. He's in the whole movie. And the problem is that the scenes he's not in, the whimsy level stays almost exactly the same. Like honestly, there's a sequence where the villains have a long musical number, and actually might be the most memorable musical number in the show. But like at the same time, it's kind of like, maybe this musical number shouldn't exist because now the villains feel almost exactly like Wonka. It's like Wonka has entered an improv scene where everyone else is already at an energy level of a 9 or 10, so he is forced to try and crank it to 11 just to get heard. So anyways, Wonka continues on. Wonka proceeds to have his adventures, which involves him and Noodle and these other characters who work in the laundromat, who are all so meaningless. Oh no, they're his team. Oh no, but the characters are stand-up comedian. He does silly voices. It'll be important later because they'll use them in a heist thingy, kind of, sort of. So Wonka makes some chocolate before he gets totally shanghaied, and he goes to this place called the Whatever Gourmet, which is apparently where the main chocolate shops are. Because as we all know, that's how chocolate's tiering works. And he wants to start selling chocolate there, and he comes and he brings out his, fancy magic Wonka chocolate. And the other chocolatiers come in and they taste him and they tell him that his chocolate is too fancy, it's too full of bells and whistles. And that's sort of the problem with the whole movie. It's almost entirely bells and whistles. It is almost entirely bells and whistles, built on an incredibly flimsy structure of, oh, Wonka misses his mommy. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be mean about it, but Jesus Christ. Look, there are good parents in Roald Dahl stories too. And if anything, the thing that his mom has in common with other good parents from Roald Dahl stories is that she's dead. Including the most absurd scene in the movie, which just brings us to one of the scenes that should be the triumph of the film, but is ultimately huge dick in the ass to it. The scene where Willy Wonka unveils his new chocolate shop. It's the very first time the movie attempts to like make this the big moment. Like this is the moment we are in the chocolate factory and we're seeing it. I mean, it's not really a chocolate factory, but somehow under all the strange limited circumstances of him doing this thing, he has created a incredible chocolate store. Now, two things of important happen in this scene that, in my opinion, are trash. Kind of. Sort of. So, on the one hand, absolutely something does need to go wrong, story structure wise, at this point to continue the narrative. My problem is what goes wrong. So, what happens is that the people who own the laundry place poison all of Wonka's chocolate with, get this, Yeti sweat, which causes everyone to grow weird facial hair and some people to get weird skin colors. And the thing about this is if anyone can get Yeti sweat, then what the fuck is Wonka? Like, do you remember in the other movies when he would go on and describe things like Oompa Loompas? And to be fair, in this movie, he describes Oompa Loompas to people and they're like, that's not a thing. Like, in the other movies, almost everything he describes to people, they're like, that's not a thing. What is he talking about? What's a snozberry? By the way, a snozberry might be the head of a penis. If everyone can just get Yeti sweat, what is he? What makes him special or interesting or important if average fucking everyday like Oliver Twist villains can get goddamn Yeti sweat? If that's a thing, then what makes him special at all? Like Roald Dahl, a lot of Roald Dahl's writing could easily be described as magic realism. When we get into the factory in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, it's like we're in another world from where the movie previously was. This movie has none of that. This movie has none of that. None of it. Everything just feels like a cartoon. From moment A to moment B to moment C, all the way through. The movie fails to realize what makes Wonka unique. In this movie, he's barely eccentric compared to everyone else. And that's like, what are you doing? He's only mildly more eccentric and magical than everyone around him. It's fucking irritating. How did no one realize this would be the problem with the movie? And then in a movie that literally made me in the theater go, oh, Jesus Christ, are you kidding me? The whole thing ends up with his shop burning down, chocolate melting, all that. Where at this point, he then reveals that he thought when he accomplished his chocolate shop that it would basically bring his mom back to life. Are you fucking kidding me? What the fuck? The whole movie hinges on the fact that his mom tells him that everything started as a dream at some point. And that's not a bad core to Wonka. But when your whole movie feels like a fucking dream, it's a meaningless measurement. When everything is surreal, nothing is special. There is no real build to the film. We are literally just watching the journey of Wonka, not even becoming Willy Wonka, by the way. There's so much more that would have to happen to this guy for him to be the Wonka we know. And by that, I mean cynical. This movie is sunshine and rainbows almost the entire way through, which is weird. Because there's a cynical implication to that the movie never touches on, never addresses, never brings to the audience's attention. You see, in every other Willy Wonka story, when we meet Willy Wonka, he has cut himself off from the world. He has turned his back on all his friends and family and everyone. The chocolate industry is so cutthroat in the following movies that he has straight up locked everyone out of his factory. That's not this guy. This guy's young and youthful and happy, and by the end of the movie, he is just as optimistically joyful as he was at the beginning, if not reaffirmed. Never mind the fact that the implication is that some events will occur between this movie and the other movies where he will become this cynical, walled off, broken, bitter eccentric. And that he will turn his back on every single one of the little friends he makes in this movie. All of them. All of them. With the cruelest, hardest pill to swallow being Noodle. Because Timothy Chalamet and the girl who plays Noodle, they do a good job together. They got decent chemistry. The movie's not a total epic disaster. It's just a bunch of loud noise to me. But the thing about Noodle is that by the end of the movie, it has been revealed that Noodle is the heir to Slugworth chocolate, the true heir. And at the end of the movie, they they reveal the criminal underdoings of all the chocolatiers. How they are punished is not clear because Willy Wonka sort of has them float into the sky, which actually makes them harder to arrest, really, if you think about it, especially at this period of time with no traffic cameras. But the ending of this movie and the following films leave us with one conclusion. One of two things happens after this film. Either A, Slugworth, much to his claims, genuinely does get off scot-free, beats the rap, continues to be a cutthroat chocolatier who hounds Wonka into the future, and there is no justice against him. Or Noodle and Wonka have a falling out where Noodle becomes just as cutthroat as any other chocolatier. Where the two lovable main characters from this movie grow up to hate each other and never reconcile. Those are the only two conclusions that could happen between this movie and the next. A lot of movies do too much in prequels to try and make you feel the other movies. I actually think that Wonka goes the other way. By the end of this movie, we have not met. By the end of this movie, there's still so much more for Wonka to become the man we expect him to be. There's so few characters that tie over. There's so few throwbacks. It's trying to do almost entirely its own thing. And in so doing, seems to not really understand the world of Willy Wonka. It's like someone gave Roald Dahl antidepressants in therapy. The cynicism is grinded down to a fine, barely there cinnamon powder that you can't really taste over the outrageous fudge and all of its fancy bells and whistles that have been tied onto the film. But before I go, I will say the cast is good. There's nothing really wrong with the cast. They're just in a movie that doesn't understand what makes this character work. But I do need to talk about the Hugh Grant thing. Because Hugh Grant plays the Oompa Loompa. And that's... Hugh Grant does fine. But like... like maybe don't erase parts that were traditionally played by people with dwarfism just because we can. There are lots of very talented dwarf actors out there. Peter Dinklage is fucking fantastic. Maybe there are other dwarf actors out there who deserve a chance to shine in big budget films. Maybe Peter Dinklage is above being an Oompa Loompa. But what I'm saying is that other people, this could be a real opportunity for them to get some recognition as little people actors. Okay? So no, I'm not particularly cool with them using Hugh Grant. I actually also didn't particularly like that they only used Roy Deep. Is that his name? I think it's Roy Deep. In the Tim Burton one. They could have hired like a bunch of actors instead of just getting one actor to do CGI. I think you already know my overall takeaway. I've only seen the movie once. Maybe it'd be better if I saw it a second time. but upon my first viewing, I found the experience boring. Never so boring as to be painful. Like, I got through it. And it's worth noting that I went to see this movie with a client. And by that, I mean, I took one of my clients to go see the movie because he wanted to see it. Part of what I do is I take people with disabilities out in the community and help them do things either recreationally or errand based. So I was on the clock essentially getting paid to see this movie. And I was still sitting there in the theater going, oh, come on. Which says a lot. Which says a lot. It doesn't have the worst CGI of last year, but that is a small backhanded compliment. So overall, no, I was not a fan of Wonka. Kind of a letdown. I'll say it here one last time. This version of Willy Wonka is all sugar, no spice. All right, well, thank you for listening to Ruben Uncut. I hope you enjoyed yourself. Please, please follow on Spotify and like and subscribe on YouTube. If you would like to contact my podcast, you can email me at rubenuncut@gmail.com, or do what most people do and just leave weird comments on the YouTube pages. All right, well, thank you for listening. Have a wonderful whatever, wherever, whenever you are.